the Cartesian plane. What we're going to be looking at is the ability to graph, whether it's points or whether we're graphing an actual line or any kind of data. So we're going to look at one of these simple ways of plotting stuff is using something called a Cartesian plane. So the position of a point on a Cartesian plane is represented by referring to it in terms of a horizontal line and a vertical line, which are called the x-axis and the y-axis respectively. So what it means is the horizontal line is the x-axis. So the horizontal line that is going to go like this, right, that's horizontal, will be labeled as x. The vertical line is going to be your y-axis, and the vertical line goes as such. We'll label it as y. So this is what we call the Cartesian plane. Okay, it looks like a plus sign, but what we have is it's really two sets of line graphs, right, that intersect one another, right? So imagine the line graph, right, that we look at when talking about integers. Right? We have positive values on this side, which means on this side we will have negative values. Okay, we switch it and we look at it with the y-axis. These points up here are positive, and the points down here are the negative. And this is what we call the Cartesian plane. Now, position of any point on the Cartesian plane is described by using two numbers called coordinates. And this is the x and y. So notice that you will see two numbers separated by a comma, but in between a set of brackets. The first number is represented with the x. Second number represents the y. Think about it in terms of the letters of the alphabet. X comes before y. So the first number is going to represent the x value, second the y. Now, another way to refer to coordinates, when you see a set of numbers, so here's an example of some numbers, let's say 2 and 3. So 2 is represented by the x, 3 represents the y, right, on the graph. This is known as a coordinate, sometimes also known as an ordered pair. So this is another term to know. So we've got coordinates, right? And the coordinates here are 2 and 3. Or the ordered pair is 2 and 3. So you should know this terminology, right? Coordinates, you should know ordered pairs. Another term you should know, Cartesian plane. And that represents this here, y-axis, and this x-axis. Now, point of intersection of the x and y axes is referred to as the origin. It's the starting point. So the coordinates of this origin is really where our 0x and our 0y lie. So the coordinate of this origin is known as 0, 0. That is the ordered pair, or that is the coordinates of the origin. Where the x is 0, the y is also 0. So it's the origin. It's the starting point. It's neither positive nor is it negative. It is right at the point of intersection. Right? So it's that point right there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to plot a few points. The first number, x, is the horizontal position of the point from the origin. This is called the x-coordinate. Okay? So remember what we said in a ordered pair, or in a set of coordinates, the first number represents the x movement. The second number, which is your y, discusses a vertical position from the point, from the origin, called the y-coordinate. So the pair of numbers, the x and y, as we said, is called an ordered pair, or their coordinates. Okay? So we're going to plot the following. 3 and 2. One thing I like to do, especially at the beginning when you're first learning this stuff, is identifying the fact that 3 is your x, 2 is your y. So, if you look at the Cartesian plane, you're also going to notice, pretty much, think of it this way. Ignore this y-axis for a second. What does it remind you of, the x-axis? If we ignore that, exactly, integers, right? So your number line. So remember how in the number line, right? The numbers that are to the right are your positives. The numbers to your left are your negatives. And it works the same way now if we decide to turn this over and we start to look at the y-axis, right? Where you notice in one direction from the origin we're going positive, in the other direction we're going negative. So, what we want to do is we want to find the coordinate 3 on the x-axis. Right? We want to find the coordinate 2 on the y-axis. And what we want to do is we want to see where is the position in which they meet. So where do these coordinates, let's say, intersect? And they intersect at that point right there, and that happens to be our coordinate A, or our point A, which is at 3, 2. Okay, so we find where the 3 is on the x. We find where the 2 is, and we figure out where do they meet, and they meet at that point. Let's look at another point here. So same thing here. -4 and 3. Here's our x, here's our y. So we find -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And so there's our -4. Then our +3, which is right here. So let's find out where they meet. And they meet at that point right there. And that is our point B. So we label it with the letter if we're given a letter. And we also label it with the actual coordinate itself. So B is at -4 and 3. So eventually, once you get the practice, right, then you won't have to draw these imaginary lines to show where they meet. You can almost look at it and go, okay, 4 and 3, and find it from that point. Okay. Now, let's look at another coordinate here, 0 and -5. So we look for 0 on the x, -5 on the y. So we're looking at 0. So we start now at 0. So instead of drawing the two lines, I might keep my pen or pencil, preferably pencil, right, on where the x-axis is. And then I draw, and then I kind of follow it along to where the -5 is on the y. And there is my point. And that is my point C, which is at 0, -5. And lastly, -5 and -3. So what we're going to do again, we're going to find where -5 is, and we're going to follow it down to where -3 is, and we draw our point. So here we went from drawing the imaginary lines to see where they meet to all of a sudden just kind of finding each point and just following it along at to its respective coordinate, which is labeled at D, which is -5 and -3. Okay, so pretty simple, right? Here's a sample problem. State the coordinates for the following points. So take a moment, look at this, right, and see if you can figure out what the x and y is. And remember, what are you always going to start with? The x and then the y, right? So your coordinates are going to be some kind of x value, comma, some kind of y value. Let's look at our points and start with letter A. So which axes are we going to look at first? X, right? So we have point A over here, right? So what point is represented with x? What point? -4, right? So -4 is our x value. What is our y value now? So we got to kind of follow it along. And what do we get? What do we get, James? 1. So what we can do is, from this point, go towards the x and y axes to figure out what are the points. So here's the x, which is pointing to -4. Here is the y, which is pointing at 1. And we just write those coordinates. So let's look at B. What is our x value of B? What is it? 0. Comma. Don't forget the brackets. So 0, comma. Where is our y? Where is our y point? Where's our y? Pardon? 5. Next one, we're looking at point C. Where is my x value? At 1. And my y value. My y value. Where are we gonna get? RNJ? -3.
2.
Is it 2? -2. Letter D. Where's on the x? Where are we on x? Kevin? Pardon? 3. And our y value is where? 0. And lastly, our letter E is pointing at what's our x value? -6, comma, and our y value -4. Okay. So notice how first number is our x, second number is our y. Right? And don't forget the brackets.